I recently played a few Minecraft PvP duels and noticed that I was losing. Losing a lot. Something needed to change, and then I realized. The mobs of Minecraft are the first things that most people fight when they start their journey. They also have the most PvP experience from billions, if not trillions, of fights against the players. With so much practice, these mobs would surely have secrets to help me destroy my opponents. So, over the next week, I will be learning the combat secrets from 7 of Minecraft's most iconic mobs, and at the end, I'm going to duel other players to see if the new strategies give me an edge over the competition. Day 1 was spent training with the zombies to learn the skills of tracking, timed attacks, and close combat. These 3 skills are used frequently by zombies to overwhelm players in combat. I started off by isolating a single zombie and tracking its head for 5 to 10 seconds. When I was ready, I moved in and used a stick to steadily whittle down the zombie's health. I repeated this process a few times to warm up, and then slowly increased the number of zombies to make things more difficult. When I reached 4 zombies at the same time, I changed my weapon to an axe to speed up the exercise. The main difficulty of this routine was the baby zombies. Tracking them was frustrating at first, but made it way easier to track the adults. It was also good practice for actual PvP, as players have top speeds similar to baby zombies. To finish the controlled practice, I spawned in 6 zombies and killed them while on half a heart. Due to my low health, I was more cautious of when I should strike, which would be useful in future duels. Now that I was confident in my skills, I began training outside the warm-up box. Things were going well until I came across a zombie wielding an iron sword. One hit was all it would take to strike me down. However, I had already practiced this exact scenario against 6 times as many opponents and was able to take down the zombie with ease. I continued practicing until I was confident in taking down the boss of the day. Let me explain. At the end of each day, I'm going to face off against the mob I'm training with and use the skills I have learned to defeat it. In this case, I was going to duel a netherite armor zombie using only a wooden stick. I started off by tracking the zombie and learning its movement patterns. Once I was ready, I moved in and used timed strikes to avoid the netherite axe and sword. As the fight continued, I grew more confident and even managed to confuse the zombie a few times. Eventually, I managed to strike the zombie down, signifying that I had passed my first day of training. Moving on to day 2. The second day of training was much different from the first. Today, I would be taught how to use a bow by Minecraft's very own skeletons. This involved the movement skills such as using different speeds and dodging projectiles. I also learned how to take advantage of my surroundings by using different elevations and obstacles to make it harder for enemies to hit me. To start off, I practiced these skills on a stationary target dummy. During this exercise, I focused on my movement and the terrain rather than accuracy. Once I had practiced enough, I moved away from the target dummy and found some skeletons to spar against. Unsurprisingly, taking down real enemies was harder than shooting at a stationary target. However, by using the skeleton's methods against them, I was able to finish the fights fairly quickly without taking too much damage. My first real challenge appeared when a skeleton wielding an enchanted bow spawned nearby. With my weak armor, it would only require a few shots to take me down. But it turns out that it doesn't really matter if the skeleton doesn't even get a chance to hit you. During my training, I also found that fighting against multiple skeletons at once was much more difficult than taking on one at a time. I even died at one point after narrowly losing a 1v3 battle. But considering the strong enchants that one of the skeletons had on their bow, I'm surprised I was even able to make the fight close. I continued dueling the skeletons in the area until I was confident in my ability to take on the boss for the day. Today, I would be facing off against a full netherite skeleton with a power 5 bow. From the start of the fight, I could tell that my movement would have to be perfect if I wanted to win. Each shot from the skeleton took off a huge chunk of health, while my unenchanted arrows did very little damage. Despite the skeleton's massive advantage, I managed to slowly whittle it down until nothing was left but a few bones and a half-broken bow. If you thought this day was hard, just wait for tomorrow's training. On day 3, I began learning the skill of teleportation from the Enderman. I started by purling between different desert structures and worked on maximizing the distance I could travel with a single throw. Once I started to feel more confident, I focused on increasing my accuracy by doing various trick shots around a village. I managed to succeed in all of the ones that I tried, except for teleporting into a composter. If you know how to do it, please leave a comment down below, because to this day, I have still not managed to figure it out. Now that I had improved my teleportation skills, it was time to test myself against some real opponents. Armed with only a wooden sword and protected by a suit of leather armor, I began challenging the nearby Endermen. It did not go well. Endermen hit hard, are fast, and they are masters at using teleportation to catch their opponents off guard. I died time after time after time, but slowly began making the fights closer until I was consistently winning without taking too much damage. These were definitely some of the most challenging fights of the week. However, they were also some of the most entertaining ones as I had to use all of my skills to win. Eventually, I felt ready to fight the boss of the day. Today, I would be facing off against a buffed Enderman with higher speed and strength. As you can expect, this was not easy. I had to time my strikes perfectly to avoid being hit, and use my ender pearls to run away to recover. My dance with death continued until I managed to get close to the Enderman, and with a final combo, I defeated my opponent, signifying that I had become a teleportation professional. Or at least a teleportation not going to hit the side of an end island and fall to my death with all of my valuables professional. Moving on to day 4. Welcome to day 4, where I would be training with spiders to learn how to use critical hits, take advantage of elevation, and learn how to climb walls. I started off by climbing a large stone wall as fast as I could. I used different strategies, but found that running and jumping while placing blocks under myself was the quickest. It also looks really cool if you do it well. When I felt ready, I moved on to practicing critical hits on armor stands. I used an axe first and focused on minimizing the amount of time between strikes. By doing this, I would be able to maximize the amount of damage I could deal in a fight. Once I had used a full axe worth of durability, I switched to a sword and repeated the process. After breaking that sword, I began fighting against the nearby spiders. During the fights, I worked on only using critical hits, relocating to lower elevations than the spiders, and placing blocks to maneuver around. Compared to the Enderman, these fights were a walk in the park, and I was able to practice my skills rather than just trying to stay alive. There was one situation where I almost died in a 1v3, and had to time my hits in order to deal as much damage as I could. After winning that fight, I decided that I was ready for the daily challenge. The final test of the day had 2 parts. Challenge number 1 was to climb the stone wall from the first part of the training in under 30 seconds. The wall is over 30 blocks tall, so I had to climb over 1 block per second. I used a mixture of wall running and stacking up to go as fast as I could. I fell down on multiple occasions, but managed to block clutch to avoid losing too much time. With only a few seconds remaining, I reached the top. My technique had a lot of room for improvement, and I think that if I keep practicing, sub 20 seconds is definitely possible. For the second challenge, I dueled a stronger, faster, and more resistant spider with nothing but a stick and some blocks. The low damage of the stick meant that critical hits would be, well, critical to my success. My main strategies were to hit the spider when it was jumping, and place blocks in front of it to impede its movement. This worked surprisingly well, and I was able to take the spider down without too much difficulty. Moving on to day 5. In newer versions of Minecraft, the axe and shield are the most important tools for PvP, and in today's training, I would be learning how to use them from the Vindicators. I started off practicing how to defend attacks with the shield by fighting the Vindicators residing within the mansion. This was surprisingly difficult, and resulted in the most deaths of any day of the challenge. Somehow, the Vindicators were able to disarm my shield and then use an immediate second strike to deal a ton of damage. To defend, I was forced to either smack the Vindicator as soon as he hit my shield, or dodge after the first strike. Despite my initial struggles, I was eventually able to defeat my opponents most of the time. I say most of the time because there were some situations where I was simply unable to avoid taking damage. Once I was ready, I switched the stick I was using out for an axe. Instead of just trying to do as much damage as possible, I worked on using my attacks to catch the enemy by surprise, knock them back, and reposition myself. Using this strategy allowed me to be much more in control of the fight, which would be useful when it came to actually fighting players. When I was ready, I explored the mansion until I discovered the boxing arena room, and then prepared for the boss fight. Today, I would be dueling a buffed diamond axe wielding Vindicator within the 5x5 arena. Even with armor on, one hit from my opponent knocked me all the way down to 1 heart. To avoid dying, I had to perfectly execute the strategy I had been practicing the whole day. The fight was intense, but surprisingly similar to my encounters with normal Vindicators. After all, diamond axes don't make much of a difference if they aren't hitting anything. With only a sliver of health remaining, I struck down the Vindicator with a final axe swing. Moving on to day 6. Since their introduction, potions have been used in Minecraft PvP for healing, slowing, dealing damage, and many other functions. Today, I would be learning how to take full advantage of these abilities with the help of the witches. When fighting, witches use potions in a specific order to increase efficiency. They start by splashing their enemy with a slowness potion to make using the rest of the potions easier. They then follow up with a poison to lower the player's health, and finish with multiple instant damage potions to end the fight. To simulate this, I placed diamond blocks around the swamp and practiced using the slow poison damage combo. The tracking skills that I had picked up from the zombies were incredibly helpful here, as I needed to be accurate to maximize the effect of the potions. When I was ready, I moved on to fighting some real opponents. My original plan was to duel actual witches, but it turns out that they have an 85% resistance to all the effects I was training. This meant that no matter how many potions I threw, the witch would be able to regenerate all the damage. Instead, I fought against iron golems with a high level of the speed effect. While I was disappointed that nothing was throwing potions back at me, I still got good practice with maintaining distance from my opponent to avoid being hit. Fighting against mobs also taught me that spamming instant damages was not the most effective strategy. After being hit, there is a short period of time when the mob or player is invulnerable. By waiting around a second between throws, this invulnerability is bypassed, allowing each splash to deal maximum damage. After defeating countless iron golems, I was ready to take on the final challenge. There would be 2 tests that I would have to succeed in. The first challenge was straightforward. I had to be a stronger, faster, and more resistant iron golem in an enclosed area. The lack of mobility made this fight a lot more difficult, however I was still able to stay out of the striking distance for most of the fight. The poison was critical in this fight to weaken the golem. Combined with the strategy of timing instant damage potions, the golem was slowly whittled down until nothing but a few iron ingots remained. The second challenge was an accuracy challenge. My goal was to throw 9 potions in a row through increasingly smaller hoops. To make things even harder, I had to strafe between shots to change my position. This was much more difficult than the combat challenge, but I was eventually able to succeed in throwing potions through even the quarter of a block hole. Although I enjoyed trying a new PvP style, I was ready to start using weapons again. Moving on to day 7. For the final day of training, I would be learning how to use a crossbow from the pillagers. Similar to the skeleton training, I started by shooting at a stationary target to get used to the trajectory of the arrows and improve my accuracy. Before I could do that though, there was something very important that I needed to do. 4 allays had been trapped by the pillagers. I quickly broke open the cages and then brought the allays to a nearby village. Once that was done, I began turning the outpost training dummies into porcupines. The main difference that I noticed from using a regular bow was the increased mobility that I had once the crossbow was loaded. This made it possible to sprint and jump around to avoid being hit when shooting enemies. After using a few stacks of arrows, I moved on to fighting pillagers around the outpost. At first, I only fought 1 pillager at a time to work on my skills. In real PvP, crossbows are generally used to deal extra damage between melee attacks. To simulate this, I practiced shooting the pillager and then retreating or hiding behind an obstacle. As I became more comfortable, I increased the number of pillagers I was dueling. The main difference that I noticed compared to fighting individual enemies was that my style switched from offense to defense. Instead of aggressively moving towards the enemy, I was forced to constantly retreat while firing shots when openings appeared. Before moving on to the boss fight for the day, I had one more challenge to take on: the Pillager Horde. Hopefully, you can see where the name comes from. At this point, I had to become even more defensive as the number of enemies had more than tripled. This was much more difficult than expected, and I actually died at one point after being shot one too many times. However, I bounced back and improved until the only sign of life near the outpost was a singular pig. Now I was ready for the final boss fight of the week. Today, I would be fighting 5 stronger, faster, and more resilient pillagers, wielding the best crossbows that Minecraft had to offer. This time, there was no running from my enemies, and I had to rely on dodging and hiding behind obstacles to survive. I unloaded countless arrows into my opponents and was beginning to lose hope when suddenly the first pillager finally fell. Once that happened, it seemed like the floodgates had opened and I began slaying the pillagers at a much quicker pace. With only one enemy remaining, I felt fully confident and soon I was left alone again with the pig. My success in the boss fight signified that I had succeeded in learning how to use a crossbow. However, it also marked the end of my 7 days of training. Moving on to the final test to prove my PvP skills. I returned to the server that had started my journey of PvP improvement, ready to show off my new skills. Instead of narrating over this next part, let's hop into a quick montage of some of my fights from the last day. I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing, but other than that, this has been GlitchNOut. Goodbye everyone!